My guest today is Nick Berg, an American author whose life has been marked by tragedy and resilience. Born in Tehran to an Iranian mother and an American father, he experienced Iran's vibrant culture and violent political upheavals. These events deeply influenced his worldview and literary voice, and in his autobiographic novel, Shadows of Tehran, Nick mirrors his life through the protagonist, Ricardo, reflecting his struggles with identity, betrayal, and redemption. Now, Nick moved to the United States, served in special operations, and transitioned to a successful tech executive career after an injury. And Shadows of Tehran is his first novel. But post military, Nick has focused on writing, speaking, and coaching on diversity and servant leadership. He is also a music enthusiast, finding creativity and renewal in producing electronic music. And Nick's work bridges cultural gaps and emphasizes resilience and hope. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome author Nick Berg and his very compelling novel, Shadows of Tehran, to the show. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate having me on the show. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Well, give me some background about your military career.
I spent 11 years in the U.S. Army, and most of that time was done in around special operations from 75th Ranger Battalion, infantry, to a lot of different areas that I can't really talk about, but it was all in special operations, say it that way.
Yeah. Well, I've interviewed people who have worked in areas of the military, and I get that a lot from them. There are things that they cannot talk about, but I highly respect that. And for you, I want to tell you right now, thank you so much for your service.
It was a pleasure, and I really, really believed in what I was doing, and I still support the military today in any way I can as a civilian now.
I love that. Now, tell me, what led you to write The Shadows of Tehran?
So, Shadows of Tehran is what I call a autobiographical fiction book, and it's the story of my life to a certain point, but it is fiction. I want to emphasize that there's fiction parts in it, and the reason that I wrote it as a fiction is because I didn't want this to be basically a counting down of events, and life is really messy, and when you go through this kind of a life, there's a lot of pieces that you try, if I'm writing as a memoir or something like that, you try to justify your actions. But by writing it as a fiction and creating a character, Ricardo, in the book, I kind of separated Ricardo from myself and was able to kind of tell a story without having to justify the whys and blaming other people and things like that. So it's kind of gave me that structure and the capability to write it in a format that I can just tell the story and tell the emotions of the story in each of the different sections of it.
Well, then let me ask you this. Did your military training kind of shape you in the way that you became an author?
Yes, it did actually. It did because when you think about special operations, everybody thinks about okay, kicking indoors and shooting and all of that stuff. But I would say most of my military career was around leadership, around understanding people, understanding psychology, being self-aware, and understanding how you feel at that moment and being able to control those emotions and driving that. So this is really that military training is really about discipline. It's about understanding, and the discipline is self-discipline more than anything else on that part of it. So making sure we have all of that set up is really, really critical to as part of this process.
Makes sense. Now, the parents in the book, David, an American soldier, and Samira, an educated Iranian woman, well, they both have very strong personalities. Ricardo inherited all of the traits of both parents, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Yeah. And David is a very interesting character in the book uh, because it was after my dad, and I finally met him 35 years after he left Iran, and in Las Vegas, out of all places, that's where he lived. And he he passed away 2 years ago, and I was able to connect with him and really ask him why and what he was doing. I would characterize him as a true patriot to his country because he spent his entire life after he left the U.S. Navy and Vietnam. He spent his rest of his life in undercover operations with the CIA. And when I asked him, why did you have a family? Why did you leave? And he had a very straight answer for me. He said, you might not like my answer, but I'm going to give it to you. Having a family is the best cover that you can have in any foreign country. That was his answer.
Did you feel used by that answer?
No, I didn't actually. You would think that I would, but I didn't, because being myself in the military and spending all that time in special operations and working with all of the what we call alphabet soup companies, NSA, CIA, all of these companies, you kind of understand their character, that it takes a special person to be in those roles and do those things. And his mental process was everything is justifiable for what you're fighting for, basically.
I can see the mentality on his side, but mirroring you, Nick and Ricardo, it must have been very difficult to try to find an answer, at least probably what, for the first 10, 15 years?
It was. It wasn't an easy process. I had to do a lot of self-evaluation, a lot of understanding, a lot of thinking. So my sister, which is Hannah in the book, and she still is very mad and angry and around what has happened and all of this stuff. I actually talking to her 2 weeks ago. She was when we brought up the subject of my dad, and she was like, I just don't understand it. I don't get it. And I'm like, yeah, that's because you never been around that part of the human factor of it. And really understanding and growing into this. And that was one of the reasons I wrote this book. It was somewhat of a therapy for me as well, is to kind of tell the story and be detached from it as the character of Ricardo, being able to kind of tell it the way it felt and the way Ricardo was feeling was therapeutic for me, writing it that way.
What was it like? Now I know that, like you said, there's parts of the book we could say that are true, which the reader will not know which parts, and there are parts in the book that are fiction, which the reader will not know which parts, because this book comes
Right.
across as an absolute compelling read. Through every chapter that when I read the whole book, and from chapter to chapter, I'm like, there was one day I was reading it, and I said, okay, I'm going to get through this chapter, then I'm going to stop. But I kept going because I kept wanting to know more. And in the book, and I don't know how much this mirrors your life, but
Mm-hmm.
David, the father, was in the background orchestrating particular moves in Ricardo's life, and Ricardo had no clue. And I found that so interesting because with David's character, I was kind of wondering, you know, is this how the intelligence agencies direct the lives of some of their operatives?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. That's to me, that is mind blowing. It's almost seeing a conspiracy theory come to life.
Yeah, it kind of, yeah, absolutely. It's and that was one of the revelations that after I found him and we had some long conversations on it, that he said, "Yeah, I had to do that because you were the perfect man for the job." That's how he kind of looked at everything, very matter of fact, completely emotionless. in his whole entire life. That's how he operated.
So, like in the book, where Martha comes into the picture, you know, Ricardo's flipping burgers at this joint. He gets to America. He was able to get at least some type of job, and then in the course of that story,
Hmm.
a military recruiting officer comes in, and I got to thinking after I read the book, I'm like, did David orchestrate the recruiting officer to come in? And and of course Ricardo ends up saying yes to the whole scenario because he'd already was forced to serve a couple of years in the Iranian army.
About 6 months. Yeah, it was a
Okay.
couple of years. It was about 6 months. Yeah, in the Iranian army. But the circumstances at that point that he joined the U.S. Army was basically 3 meals a day, a place to sleep, and steady work that you don't have to worry about your safety. And there's, I don't know if you recall the part that he wakes up in the barracks and has a warm blanket, has a place that he can plant his feet on. And that was his thought process at the time, that he wanted that safety and wanted to get out of complete survival mode, and that the U.S. Army offered that to him. And that is something that I will always be thankful for, is that the U.S. Army takes care of its own, and they truly do in every step of the way. They truly do.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because you were born in Tehran. You have an American father and an Iranian mother. Were you automatically considered a United States citizen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I was trying to figure it out. I knew that that's usually the case, but I was kind of wondering because here you are, you were forced into the Iranian army for 6 months, and then you end up in as a United States military uh, soldier. And so I was trying to put the two and two together. I was like, oh, cool, because they never questioned citizenship. So it dawned on me like, okay, his father's American, so it's a given. And
Yeah. So my
what
dad filed the Yeah, my dad filed my birth and everything with the U.S. Embassy at the time when I was born, me and my sister both. He never filed the papers for my mom, but he did file the papers for me and my sister as soon as we were born with the U.S. Embassy. So we were registered. And having American parent, father or a mother, you're considered a natural born citizen, basically.
how in the how did your mother take it? Because I read in the book where Samira was, she's like, what do you mean that we're married? There's no marriage certificate that was filed here in the United States. That was a big shock. And I never really figured out as to why. Was that to make sure that she stayed in Iran?
Yes, absolutely.
That's kind of cruel.
It is. It is. Yeah. But that's how he operated.
Wow. Yeah, I find this book, even though I've read this book from cover to cover, Nick, I'm still finding it so compelling because I love I love spy stories. I love assassin stories. Some of my favorite shows are like The Diplomat and Jack Ryan and Reacher, and so
Mhm.
I love military. I've even interviewed a former military veteran who he told me, like what you told me. I can't tell you everything I did, but I'll put it like this. If the CIA got into trouble, they called us to get them out.
Yes,
So,
yes, that is right. And
yeah,
there's
so
a story in there about that too. The
I
exact same scenario.
the moment I read that particular story in the book, my mind went back to the interview that I did. I went, "Wow, this stuff is just real." But I'm so intrigued by the secrecy. People laugh because, my last name is Bond. They always ask, is your first name James? So I get the whole spy thing. So I
Right.
love it. But I've interviewed so many people who were born in Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Jordan. So tell me, How would you describe the differences of being in America versus Iran, especially pre Ayatollah Khomeini?
So Iran is a very different country than Iraq and Afghanistan and all of those other countries that you mentioned. And the main part what brings the difference is Iran is Persian. I mean, the Iranians are Persians, and we're kind of the only non-Arab country outside of Israel in the Middle East. And heritagely is a very different race of people, basically, than all the other Gulf countries in Iran. Iran is a country that is very societal wise, very maternal. So if you look at Saudi Arabia and all of these other countries, they are very paternal. In Iran, is the women run the show basically. And even in the language, the word when you say husband and wife in Persian, they say wife and husband. There is no genderizing in the Persian language. So when you're talking about someone, you don't know if they're a man or a woman or anything else because there's no genderizing in the Persian language. And when women get married, they don't take their husband's last name, they keep their own last name. So it's a very different society. Now, I would say it's a very culturally confused society at the same time because the religion of Islam was forced on the Persians when the Arabs invaded Persia, and the Arab culture is mixed with that Islamic culture. So the Islam is really more paternal, which goes against the culture of Persians, which are maternal. So it became a totally different society of colors and changes and a lot of contradictions basically in the whole societal environment.
That would,
Now, if you
no,
look
no, go
at
ahead.
most of the Arab countries, their governments are pro-United States and pro-Western, and the people are a lot more traditional, Islamic traditional. Iran is the opposite. People are more Westernized than pro-America. I mean, Iran was the only country that after 9/11, their whole candlelight visuals in after the 9/11 happened, even though the government is so anti-American.
Wow, yeah, that would cause cultural confusion. So let me ask you, many knew about the beautiful Iran before the regime took over and abolished basically every freedom. Do people still dream of a pre 1979 Iran with the hopes of it coming back one day?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like one of the biggest anti-government movements right now is the son of the Shah, the ex-Shah of Iran. And just 2 or 3 days ago, there's like a big strike on all of the drivers that drive big trucks and stuff all across, say, 75 cities in the country, and they're yelling the name of the Shah's son to come back. And there was this big movement in Iran 2 years ago, Women Life Freedom, that was about the women being free and taking off their scarves and all of that stuff, even though that it's mandatory by law and all of that. You can watch videos of Iran that women don't wear the hijab as a sign of protest these days.
Wow. Now, in your book, and I love how every chapter starts off with a quote. I was writing them down because they're so profound when you really look at them and you take time to read them and ponder their meaning. You have one by Winston Churchill, which says, "When you are going through hell, keep going." What do those words mean to you?
Those words are kind of been I have it everywhere. A lot of people might not like Winston Churchill, but to me, he was a hero of World War II. I mean, there was just no question. And he's absolutely right. And the whole purpose of writing this book is about giving people hope that no matter what you're going through, there is light at the end of that tunnel, and it's a moment that will pass, and you will go through it, and you will get to the other end of it and look back at it and say, I made it through. And the quote from Winston Churchill has always stuck with me from when I was a very young child. Um, hey, this is hell right now, but keep going because it'll end at some point. And you'll look back at it and you'll think, okay, I made it through and I made it through stronger.
Yeah, when I because you have this theme of that quote running through this book, and it's very
Yes,
well written, and like you said, when you read this book, there is a lot of hope there. But for a lot of people like me as a reader, there's inspiration, there's motivation, there's encouragement, and I love Ricardo's mindset throughout his life. And I found one of the humorous parts was when with Ricardo and Malcolm going through basic training in the United States military. Ricardo goes, "Man, this is easy," and Malcolm's like, "What are you talking about? These
oh,
people yell at us, and they were calling, the sergeant, the drill sergeant's calling Ricardo, nicknamed him terrorist, and
right,
but he never let it get to him because he's like, dude, I served 6 months in the Iranian army. This is nothing."
right,
And and of course, he went through, interrogations
right.
prior to military service. So, he got toughened up real quick.
Yes, he had to grow up very quick and went through all of that. So it's when you look at things in life, it's all matter of perspective and how you look at things and how you drive things. And I contribute that to a lot of my success in life as well, is having that perspective around how you look at things and how you frame things for yourself in your mind. That's really what it comes to. And the good example I always use, I said, remember when you were in elementary school a long time ago and your mom and dad were always on you on getting good grades and all of that. You got a bad grade and how you felt like, oh my God, the world is ending and everything is falling apart. How am I going to tell my parents about this bad grade? And they're going to talk to the teacher. And think about that moment. But now think about it, looking at it from now. When you look at it from now, it's like, eh, it was a bad grade. But at that moment, it seemed like the whole world is falling apart. So when you frame everything that goes wrong in your life in that fiction, is that this is just a bad grade. I'm going to get over it and I'm going to move on.
Yeah, and and again, ladies and gentlemen, when you read this book, Shadows of Tehran, there is inspiration in this book. Even in the hardships that the character Ricardo goes through, you're going to find ways that even in your own life, you're like, okay, I may be going through hell, just keep going because there's always light at the end of that tunnel, so to speak. Now, Nick, I want to ask you about a character in this book, which I absolutely despise, and that is
Yeah,
Reza, and very interesting character, but he pretends to be religious, but he has no morals whatsoever. When I went through the whole scenario of reading about him in this book, I kept thinking because he's entering this time where Iran is changing and not
right.
changing for the better. When I looked at this character, I was like, wow, he is an Iranian sheep following the mullahs who happen to be wolves.
Right.
And so when I looked at that, millions of Iranians, were they raised that way? Into
People
this type of warped thinking?
from the village, yes. A lot of the people that didn't get the education, didn't have the education, and that was the cause of the revolution more than anything else. It was the basically the people, the uneducated, the people that believe into the religious sayings that are basically there's no wrong in that a religious person can do no wrong, and that kind of drives that. That's one of the things I always say in America when that people say, well, he's a God-fearing man, so uh, I trust him. I'm like, what are you trying to tell me? Are you telling me that if God didn't fear the God punishment of God, he would be completely a cheat and a bad person? Is that what you're trying to say? That this character is the only reason that he's a good guy is because God is going to punish him? So it's really that thought process of religion doesn't mean morality. And morality and religion are two different things, but people try to make it as a one thing. And one of the things I love about America is the separation of religion and the government. And one thing that I think in the Iran theocracy that they have learned is that um, government by root is corrupt. Doesn't matter which country you talk about. They're politicians. It's politics. Everybody knows that. So when you mix religion and politics together, you're actually corrupting the religion more than you're anything else. And that's really what happened.
It reminded me of what Hitler did to the Germans.
Right.
And because even a lot of people don't know when it comes to Nazi history that Hitler even infiltrated the church in Germany, even
Yes.
rewrote the Bible. And so a lot of young people fell in the line to believe what Hitler was doing. A lot of the older ones were doing the same thing, but then there were some who, well, no, I know what the real truth is. But you have
What's
a
the real problem?
line in your book on page 153, and it says desperation and indoctrination, they prey on the weak, the uneducated. How many millions of Iranians have died because their lives have been raised on lies from their own government?
Yes, millions, millions. I mean, there was that pieces in the book about the 14-year-old that runs through the minefield because he feels like that he's gonna go to heaven. That that is the mentality of how religion can take over somebody and completely brainwash them to a point that they would do anything at that point. And
Yeah,
you can see that in around the world, the suicide bombers, the from ISIS, from it's all the same story basically.
yeah, and I read that, when with that 14-year-old boy in the book, after Ricardo told him specifically what to look for, he never listened. It went in one ear and out the other, and he took a beeline across that field. He didn't care. It's almost like he was hoping to hit a landmine.
Yes, exactly, exactly, exactly. Because at that time, all the government preached that if you die on the line for God, all of your sins are forgiven right at that moment, and you go straight to heaven.
Yeah, that's crazy because and I'm going to ask you about this. I'm not going to lean one way or another if it's truth or fiction. But on page 72, Ricardo gives Reza a speech he'll never forget. That was somewhat of a turning point for Ricardo, wasn't it? Because
Yes, it was.
after that, he didn't let any challenge defeat him.
Right. That was a defining moment for him. And that moment is actually truth. And I'll tell you that that moment was the moment that he realized who he is. And that's the moment that he realized that he doesn't have to just take it, that he can fight back.
Yeah. I mean, just to read it, I mean, it's a wow moment in this book. And then I knew that it had to be the turning point because from that point on, he had an inner strength in him that he didn't have before. And whatever challenge came to him, he took it on. And then when he got much higher within his military career, then the others knew how fast he could think on his feet, figure things out. It was almost like a second or sixth sense, so to speak, when it came to certain military missions. And I mean, it was just this inner strength that just exploded in Ricardo after, threatening Riza, because it's like, look, you've already torn me down to everything. There's nothing else you can take. And
Yeah,
that's when his
absolutely.
strength welled up. So, yeah.
That was the moment that he realized that he's in control more than anything else, that he is in control of his life. And that's one of the messages of the book that I'm try to convey in the book, is that the circumstances in your life doesn't determine the outcome. What determines is your decisions. And every decision that you make compounds the next decision for you. And those decisions are what determines how your life is going to turn out, not what happens to you.
Exactly. And this is, like I said, this is a very compelling read. I absolutely love it. Now, I found it interesting because something really caught my eye, and a bit ironic that you mentioned Pink Floyd's song "Comfortably Numb," which happens to be one of my uh, probably top three favorite songs. But Ricardo used everything he knew to push through the moments of hell in his life. Um, and that included being interrogated by the Revolutionary Army in Iran, uh, and then being in a position that Ricardo even had in his military career. He didn't allow any pain to stop him, either from his personal life or his military life. Correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Yes. As human beings, we have the strength inside of us. And the way I kind of talk about this in some of my speeches when I give to some of my corporate clients and work with a lot of the corporate speeches, the way I kind of say this is that if you're running a race and you're going down a hill and all of a sudden you fall and you break your arm, there's a lot of attention you're going to pay at that moment that your arm is broken and it hurts and all of that stuff. You're going to spend a lot of time focusing on that. At that moment, you have a decision to make. Do you want to win the race, or do you want to focus on the pain? And the thing is, it doesn't mean that the pain is going to go away. It doesn't mean that you ignore the pain. But at that moment, you make a decision that I'm going to acknowledge the pain. I'm going to acknowledge that it's here. I'm going to acknowledge that I have broken my arm. But if my goal is to win the race, I'm going to keep going and I'm going to take the pain because that's my goal. Now, you have two choices to make at that point. The first choice is I'm going to sit here, I'm going to feel sorry for myself. Oh my God, I fell, I broke an arm, and this kind of a thing. That's a choice. And you're going to feel sorry for yourself and look down and say, oh my God, I didn't get to run this race. I really wanted to win it, but because of this, I can't do it. So those are our excuses. The next piece is that I acknowledge this happened, I acknowledge this pain, and I decide consciously to get up and run the race because that's more important to me than feeling sorry for myself and for my arm that's broken. And you can take that in every aspect of life. That when something bad happens to you, you have to make that decision and that choice. Do I want to focus on how I got here and how bad this thing is and all of that stuff? Or do I want to look at that next step? I want to get up and keep going and decide that I'm going to be a survivor in this and not the victim.
It reminds me of the story when Ricardo was going through ranger training and broke his leg and did not stop. His only focus was on the finish line, and
Right.
even the officer was like, "Get in the truck." And I
Right.
thought it was so funny when Ricardo goes, "Well, is that a direct order?" And he goes, "No." Then I'm going to keep going.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it was funny because he focused, because I noticed this about Ricardo in many of the stories inside the book, where he wouldn't focus on the pain, he was focusing on the outcome.
Exactly.
But he never, even in situations in where he could have died, he never focused on death as the outcome. He was focusing on, I'm going to get through hell, I'm going to come out on the other side. And even when he was being interrogated uh, by the Revolutionary Army, um, I was just like, I mean, they're not, they can't, these guys can't tear him down.
Right.
And so but then there was that other scenario where I think it was he was in the military, American military, and where he got captured.
Hmm.
And again, it's almost like Ricardo was laughing on the inside.
Right.
As much as they beat the living hell out of him, it's almost like he had this inner laugh, like, you can beat me all you want, because in the end, I'm going to win.
Right. And when you focus on that, that's the story of this. Is that Ricardo is? I don't want didn't want Ricardo to be a hero. It's not about being a hero. It's not about being something different than everybody else. It's decisions. It's mindset. It's anybody can be at that point and make that decision consciously of what they want to focus on and how they want to run their life and how they want to deal with things, because life has lots of ups and downs, as everybody knows. Life throws you a lot of things that you're not expected, and you have to always expect the unexpected, and when the unexpected comes, you just push through it and try to do your best and get there, because at the end of it, it's just that bad grade that you're gonna worry about.
I love it. When I was reading where Ricardo was planning, he was making all of those plans against the Revolutionary Army as the Shadow Rider. It really set him up to be an elite ranger in the military, didn't it? Because being a rebel and then creating precise plans, they worked very well for him when he got into a real military. I mean, he was
Right.
fast on his feet when it came to figuring things out, wasn't he?
Yes, yes. And the thing is, again, it goes back to the mindset. It's not a special skill, it's not a superpower, it's not being Superman. It's a mindset that anybody can have if they truly put their mind to it and say, I'm just not going to give up. Today is not the day for me to give up. Today is the day that I'm going to keep moving forward. I'm going to keep driving. I'm going to be there at the end of there, because I see the light and I'm going to get to it one way or the other.
Yeah, and he mentioned, Ricardo quotes this in the book, because when he got into the American military, and then he was able to get into those special areas of the military and had to keep going through new training and new training. He would even tell the friend, it could have been Malcolm, it could have been others, where he would say, "This isn't about physicality. This is about
Right.
mentality." Where so many of the other soldiers would fail out of, if it was the Ranger program or whatever it was, he was looking at it completely different than everybody else. This is a mental challenge. This is not a physical challenge. It's just like when he told that one guy that was like 6'4", over 200
Hmm.
pounds. It's like, dude, just because you're tall and big doesn't mean you're going to make it.
Right. Exactly. And they tell you that in the military, when you first go into those trainings, they tell you that. It said, when you come in here, we don't want Superman. What we want is for you to think and for you to control your emotions, for you to control your environment, to figure out what is the best way of doing things without having to exert physical. Now, the physical part is always part of that. You always will have to have that because it's the military. But The part is the mentality that determines everything. And this is not just in the military. I have seen this in my own life after the military. It's the mentality of, and I always say when you get into those zones, and there's uh, there's this friend of mine that always called it deliberate discomfort. This is something that we do every day. We deliberately make ourselves uncomfortable because that's the space that you grow in.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a little funny part in the book where they were going through that one training where they had to carry the telephone pole.
Yeah, yeah,
And that, I'm not going to give it away, but that part proves brain over brawn works every time. And I can see why elite military soldiers, it's based on brain power, not physical power, because your brain has to figure out the plan. In some cases, you have to create a plan, as you know this, in an instant in a scenario, and
right.
then the physicality comes into it. But it's brain first in
It's
every
brain first.
situation, and that's what you show in this book. But I want to bring up something else in this book because I love the way to how I was following this along in Ricardo's story. He had many women in his life. He had his mother, his sister. He had Bahar, Martha, and Donna. Of course, his true love was Bahar, and he kept his promise to her even after he lost her. How did her memory drive him?
Her memory is basically his North Star. What they kind of had and what they lived on was based on what she fought for, and what they were fighting together for was the freedom, was freedom, living in a free world, living in somewhere that people have opportunities and chances and live however they choose to live and wear whatever they want to wear, listen to whatever they wanted to listen to, believe in whatever they wanted to believe in. So that's the North Star, and that nobody would be able to force their ideas and their things on anybody else. And that's what truly America stands for in the world, is that freedom of choice. Not that America is perfect. I'm not here to say America is perfect in every way. No, it's there's nothing. There's no such thing as perfect in this world, but it's the best thing that we have in this world that shows that truly you can be free and live how you want to live. And it's a gift. It's a gift. And we just passed Memorial Day, and I lost a lot of friends in the military. And when I look at Memorial Day, it's about those people giving their life for the other people to enjoy it. Going to the beach, having a barbecue, and all of those things, those are gifts. Those are gifts. And not giving up on your own life, not giving up on the things that you want to do, not giving up on your hopes and dreams, and living your full life. That's what's really about. And that's what Bahar's idea was, is living a full life.
Yeah, there's a saying, and I may get the saying wrong, but it's in the book, um, where wolves are fighting other wolves so the sheep can rest easy. And that's what
Exactly.
our military is. As American citizens who are not in the military, we're enjoying this freedom, but it's because somebody else is fighting on our behalf.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And it's always been that story. And this is why we have to thank our military. This is why we have to take care of our military. And when they come home, not all of them come home with scars that you can see. They carry a lot of scars around that you cannot see. And it's sad that we don't see those, and we always look at the physical things, but we don't look at the emotional side of things, the PTSDs, the nightmares, the things that you carry from the things that you see that no human should ever see. But they do that, and we have to take care of them. So this is one of my biggest causes, is to help military people, help the ones that are coming back, integrating them back into the society.
Yeah, there's so much more to this book but I want everybody to read this book because I could talk about this book all day with you because it is, again, it is an incredible read. It's so compelling. When you read a chapter, you're wanting to know what happens in the next chapter. It's that type of book you just can't put down. I know how the book ends, so I'm not going to say how it ends. So I have to ask, please tell me you're writing a sequel.
I'm working on it. Actually, this book is meant to be a trilogy. Actually, there's a second book that is going to finish Ricardo's story, and the third book is actually going to prequel the story of David in the book.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait for the next two because this is the type of story where you're like, I want to know because I want to know more about David because that is a whole story within
Right.
itself. I could actually see this whole, I guess the trilogy, I could see this become either a streaming series or a film. There's just so much there. Uh, so who knows? Are you planning on making a movie out of it?
I'm hoping so at some point.
Well, I absolutely love it, Nick. And ladies and gentlemen, Shadows of Tehran is a compelling story with multiple characters and stories, all intertwined into the life of the main character, Ricardo. And it is such an incredible story on how far the human existence can be pushed, and in this case, in the right direction. In America, we don't know what oppression feels like. We may read about it, but we don't know the stress, the fear, the uncertainty, and of the possibility of having no future. There are many important quotes in this book, but one really stood out to me, and it reads, "The worst prisons were not constructed of warped steel and stone. They were carved out of expectations and lies, judgment and trust." And that was a quote by Kelsey Lee Reber. And when you read the book, you're going to understand that quote comes to life in almost every chapter of this book. Expectations, lies, judgment, and trust. These four elements can shape one's present and future and pretty much sums up the Shadows of Tehran, forged in conflict from Iranian rebel to American soldier. And it's available now on Amazon. And Nick, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing this incredible book and bits of your story. I absolutely loved it.
Thank you, Dr. Ward. Really appreciate your time and really appreciate your thoughts on this. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for watching and listening. Please visit us at, well, either bondoncinema.com or drwardbond.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channels and check out my Bond on Cinema Prime show as well. And as for me, you're either going to see me at the movies or from the red carpet.